Welcome to the 17th edition of Make Pro Wrestling Majestic again. I am Tiger Height.
And I'm Peanut Gallery.
And because, once again, we don't have a pay-per-view show or anything of the like, we are going to be talking about bad gimmicks that worked.
Yes.
So, I gave Peanut Gallery a list of, I think, like 7 people, 7 different universes, and we're just basically going to really deconstruct them, our experiences with them, and just have a free-form discussion about it, since there's not really anything else going on. So, Peanut Gallery, who do you want to start with?
Well, I'm going to preface this by saying these are not bad gimmicks. The gimmicks themselves weren't bad. They could have very easily been bad. You know, if it was done in modern-day WWE, it would probably be pretty bad. And if it was controlled by certain forces, like Bruce Pritchard or whatever the case may be, it may actually turn out to be pretty bad.
And then also there's generational context with it and all of that fun stuff.
Yes.
These are because people viewed these gimmicks originally as stupid,
Yes.
as ridiculous.
Yes.
And they made it work. So
Yes.
that's the preface. That's why I said bad gimmicks. They're not bad gimmicks now.
Well, they could be bad gimmicks now.
Given the right person, circumstances, all that fun
Yes.
stuff. There's a lot going on with gimmicks.
There is.
Anyway, who do you want to start with?
Let's start with the Hurricane universe.
Ah, yes, the Hurricane. I mean, go ahead, continue.
Okay. Well, the gimmick was a superhero. I mean, we have a superhero gimmick right now, which is really bad.
I'll be talking about that one.
But this superhero gimmick turned out to be pretty good along with the rest of the universe. And this was down to the fact that, and you're going to see this theme throughout the Attitude Era, is that it actually was a successful gimmick as well.
Right.
It was successful because of the fact that the powers that be decided that it was going to be successful.
But here's the other thing is that getting over makes a gimmick. So
Right.
if the Hurricane as a superhero at the time that it debuted, which was I think in
It was late Attitude Era, which is another thing
late
that
Attitude
made this gimmick successful. Was it was something that was silly in the midst of
so much
an era
seriousness
where there
and
was so
dark-
much
right.
seriousness.
Right, and it got over with the crowd.
Right.
Because, number one, you can't say that Gregory Helms did not do good. He did so awesome with this gimmick.
Yes.
And I think, really, once again, you give the gimmick to the right person, they're going to knock it out of the
But he's
park.
the one that came up with the gimmick.
Right.
And
that's why it was so popular.
He also won titles under this gimmick, and I'm not just talking about the Cruiserweight Champion. He won that on a few occasions,
Right, he
under this gimmick.
Right.
But let's talk about his tag teams.
Right.
He was with Lance Storm. They won a tag team title.
Yep.
He was with Kane. I believe I think they went for a title. I don't think they actually won the
it,
title.
no.
But they did go for the title.
You might be thinking of Kane and X-Pac, who also wore green, too. They won the tag team champions.
But that's not. And then,
Right.
of course, you got Rosie, which was the final person that he won the tag team titles with,
Right.
under the Hurricane gimmick.
And once again,
He-
superhero in training. That's
Right.
stupid, and especially during the Ruthless Aggression era.
Yeah, this was very beginning of the Ruthless. This is like 2003, I believe,
Right.
is when that occurred.
But also, once again, you get that nice comedy relief, and this is a comedy that makes sense.
Right.
It's a comedy that it's not stupid. It's like, okay, he can still wrestle really well, but he's just kind of silly, and it's fun, and kids like him. And
Right, but let's talk about the other piece of it too. He was in a pretty high-profile rivalry with The Rock.
Right, The Rock and him. That
In
chemistry was
2002,
awesome.
and he won the final match between those two because Stone Cold Steve Austin came back.
Right. The Rock was the mega heel,
Yep.
and then his stuff with the Hurricane. We experienced it
It was
live.
it was magic. It was magic as it occurred.
And also, you could tell The Rock was having fun with it. The Hurricane obviously was having fun with
Right,
it.
but that was just because it was a bridge between, because Stone Cold Steve Austin was out at the time with
Right.
an injury, and that was going to be The Rock's next rivalry, but they needed kind of a bridge rivalry, but
Right.
it worked really well.
Right. And it was great. I love the Hurricane.
You know, and let's talk about, too, the fact that we had Mighty Molly, and we had Super Stacy.
Yeah, Super Stacy. I remember that.
Yes.
Super
Stacy was, and they were both during tag teams as well. I believe Mighty Molly was when it was with Lance Storm in the Hurricane. Mighty Molly was incorporated into that one.
Right.
And then we also had Super Stacy in the tag team with the Hurricane and Rosie. So you had that dynamic there as well, which made it just that much better.
Right.
So the Hurricane's gimmick should have been bad. Had the circumstances been different, it would have been a really bad rivalry.
And if it wasn't with Gregory Helms, that definitely was there. Also, I chose the Hurricane for you specifically because I know for a fact when we were growing up, the Hurricane was your favorite wrestler.
Yes. So that's kind of where that came from. So again, it was successful because of the circumstances it was being placed in. Obviously, Gregory Helms, still being employed with the company, has a very good relationship with the management of WWE.
Right.
So I think that played a role in it as well.
Absolutely, 100%. So
all right,
who to next?
The Undertaker.
All right, so I chose The Undertaker because of the original gimmick, where he was literally an Undertaker with a pallbearer.
Right, he was. But The Undertaker's gimmick, at that time it worked because that was the era that WWF was in. They had all of those goofy characters.
But this one was scary.
But something about The Undertaker lasted through the generations.
And you see, the thing is that Mark...
And what I'm going to say, the only reason that this was successful is not only is Mark Calloway a good wrestler, like as in he is a good performer. He has been a consistently good, I mean, not in his later years, but he has been a consistently good performer. But also his mic skills are just fantastic.
Right.
And he was also billed with fantastic managers at the very beginning.
Right. He was with
that
Dude...
really helped.
Right. He was with Dude Love, who was the evangelical, once they underwent Clash, and then Paul Bearer came along. And then that was there. But the one thing about Undertaker is that Mark Calloway understood that if the Undertaker wanted to continue and be successful, he made it malleable.
Yes.
Where it changed.
That was one of the things that I said too, is that the Undertaker changed the gimmick that was the Undertaker was used in a multitude of ways.
Right.
We have the OG Undertaker. We have the Undertaker now with Kane becoming a feature. The Undertaker is a tag team competitor.
Right.
We have the Ministry of Darkness.
We have Ministry of Darkness Undertaker.
We have American Badass. We have Big Evil.
Right.
And then we had the Return of the Dead Man. And then later on, it was the Streak.
Right. And then it was
Undertaker.
all about that. Right, exactly.
And so, with that being said, his gimmick was utilized in a multitude of ways without changing the core of The Undertaker.
Right.
You change the gimmick to where it becomes malleable.
Right.
To where it changes with the times.
Exactly.
Other things that made it successful, obviously, the feuds, a lot of main event feuds.
Classic stuff, stuff that people will remember forever, the matches that are associated with Undertaker.
Yep, the new matches, like
casket
Buried
matches,
Alive.
Hell in a Cell,
Buried Alive,
Inferno,
that sort of thing.
Buried Alive. A lot of great moments, but honestly, I also chose it because I think, once again, it was just the right person at the right time.
Yes.
Undertaker, or Mark Callis, was a WCW guy who just came in here. This was a gimmick that shouldn't have been as successful as it was, but just because Undertaker is Undertaker and Mark Calloway is Mark Calloway, honestly, that's why it worked.
Right.
Honestly. So,
all right, we're going to talk about the Broken Universe now.
All right. Now,
so we're
this one is weird. Like, this one is very weird.
So, on a side note, the Delete was actually inspired by Death Note.
Really?
Yes, that is where he got that catchphrase from.
Yeah, we just watched Death Note and the whole Delete thing because one of the characters
one of the characters who played Kira did delete.
Right, as he was writing people down. I did not know that. That's cool.
So
now I see
it actually plays into the psychology of this feud, and that's why this feud I think was most interesting for me, was just because of the psychological aspects of it. And also, if it was with another company, you could not have this sort of creative freedom. Matt Hardy was given total creative freedom to do whatever the hell he wanted with this.
But
Impact was in a pretty bad place at this point in time.
This is when Impact was at its lowest. Like it was about to be off TV.
Let's be clear. Impact was at a pretty low point.
And I hate to say this, but Broken Matt Hardy saved the company.
They were willing to try anything, and you could tell in the attitudes of the stars of who was running it at the time. They were willing to try anything, especially Billy Corgan.
Right.
He was very much willing to try anything to save this company. And there we go.
And Jeremy Borash really needs some credit too. He really played a huge part in this. But also, the one thing that I really like about this is that it's not just Matt Hardy.
No.
It's the entire universe. It's a lore.
It's a lore, right. There's a lore about this. It's not about this character.
Right.
There's a lore about playing homage to past events, especially with the battle between Jeff and Matt Hardy going back to the place where it started.
Right, you have symbolically amazing matches. Well, not even matches, just cinematic masterpieces like Ultimate Deletion that really put this over. And once again, I'm going to say it again because I think there is some honesty there. I think the Broken Matt Hardy gimmick saved Impact. Because everyone talked about it.
And anytime other companies have tried to replicate that magic, it could not be replicated because Matt Hardy was not given the amount of creative freedom that he needed in order to make this gimmick work.
Right, and it has to be Jeremy Borash and Matt Hardy. Like, there's no other person who could be incorporated in there.
Right.
To make it work.
AEW, his whole thing in AEW didn't work out very well. That's why he kind of moved pretty quickly on to Big Money Matt.
And also, once again, his shelf life is not that much. So actually, I like the new gimmick with him being like this.
The more managerial
Big Money Matt. I love Big Money Matt.
But
this thing saved his career.
Broken Matt will not work without Brother Nero. That's the other thing too.
Absolutely
That's the other reason why it didn't work in AEW.
Right. You gotta have all the characters in play to make it work. It's not just Matt Hardy, it's the universe.
Right. And don't get me started with WWE and how they handled that. They didn't do much with it. Well, at the time too, there was a lot of legalities.
They were scared to do a lot with it. And the thing is, you either throw everything from Broken Matt's universe at it or don't do it at all.
Right.
You gotta do everything.
Right.
Because, once again, it's the universe. It's the incorporation of everything and everybody that made this work.
And unlike the universe around Hurricane Helms, we have to think about the fact that all of these characters were incorporated at once.
Right.
And so you have to have...
You established Brother Nero, you established Senior Benjamin, you established Rebby Sky, Maxwell. I think if Matt Hardy was given the true creative freedom now, it could work.
Right.
But once again, you gotta have everybody involved. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't Senior Benjamin die?
I'm not sure.
I thought I read something that he passed. I could be very wrong.
But obviously, WWE does not do storylines that involve little kids very much.
Right. I could be wrong. Sorry, Rebby. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I thought I saw something about it.
But anyways, let's move on to our next, I guess, iteration. Right to censor.
Oh, I love this gimmick because it was literally a fuck you to what was the group?
To PTC.
PTC. Thank you.
Yes. It was a parody of what actually was happening with the WWF and the PTC at the time. They were trying to censor. They were trying to get UPN to censor WWE's content.
Because
this was a parody. It would not have worked at any other point in time. This was actually a very short-lived...
It was, but it was very impactful.
Faction.
Mm-hmm.
It was very impactful. Again, it was kind of that comedic sort of thing towards the end of the Attitude Era. And I think, too, that the reason that they did some of these funny stuff at the very end is because they knew that they won. Because WCW was going into the shitter at the time. They could just do whatever they wanted, and WCW wasn't even on their radar at that point.
But Right to Censor, the one thing about Right to Censor, it was hokey, but it was they took it very seriously.
They actually had a lot of success with this as well. They won the tag team champions. They won.
Ivory had a huge WrestleMania match for the women's champion against China, and that was a huge rivalry because China was white hot at that point too.
So they won championship gold with it. They had very high-profile feuds with the Acolytes and the Dudleys, and the reason that they went after those teams in particular is because of the tables for the Dudleys, because of the Acolytes and just their general violence, because that's what they are.
Right, they were brutal. They drank, they beat people up, and the censor was really that thing. Val Venus and the Good Father joined the group because they kept attacking them, and they turned heel, which I thought was brilliant.
Yes, it was brilliant for Val Venus to kind of turn that gimmick around. Also, the leadership of Stevie Richards, he understands hardcore matches very well, so he can understand the psychology about trying to censor those.
We were just getting into wrestling with Right to Censor, but I remember everything about their stuff, especially their theme music, where it was just a loud, obnoxious horn, and it was perfect for them. They couldn't have done this at any other point in time, but thank God they did it because it was so perfect. And everybody likes Right to Censor.
Yep.
And honestly, I think it was a successful gimmick because clearly people won titles.
Yep.
They were big major programs.
Yes.
And they got the PTC to get really pissed off. I remember the PTC were pissed.
Oh yeah, they were not very happy with that.
And it was funny.
It was. Again, it's the right people. They were very high profile. They were in very high profile matches for their divisions. Stevie Richards was really a big help, and just the people that they went after.
Absolutely, great stuff.
All right, let's talk about Honky Tonk Man.
Now, this one, I really like the story with Honky Tonk.
So Honky Tonk Man started out as they were billing him as a fan favorite.
Right.
Didn't go over very well, but once he turned heel, that is when he got his star. And this is one of those gimmicks that is simple.
But now, Honky Tonk Man did Honky Tonk Man before he even went to the company.
Right. But he wasn't called Honky Tonk Man.
No.
Of course, Elvis impersonator, that just... it's just a gimmick that he's always had.
And then with Jimmy Hart there, because Jimmy Hart wrote all of his music.
Right.
And Jimmy Hart is very, he is very musically gifted, and I think his incorporation was perfect.
So again, you have an Elvis impersonator who started out as a face, but the crowd wasn't really into it. But once he went villainous, and then he won the Intercontinental Champion, held it for 64 weeks, and was in some pretty high profile rivalries. But
at this point, this is when the Intercontinental Champion meant a lot. He was with Bret Hart and Roddy Piper and Ultimate Warrior, who took the belt off of him. When you start working with those people, you've made it somewhere big. He worked with Hulk Hogan, for God's sake.
And the Honky Tonk Man, he always found ways to reinvent his character in subtle ways. Not in ways like The Undertaker, but in more subtle ways, like the ways that he would win matches, quote unquote.
Right.
The way that he would play into the rivalries with different individuals.
Exactly.
There's little things just changed based on who he was feuding against, which I found really interesting as well, especially during that historic Intercontinental title reign.
Right. And it was great because he got mega heat. He was so unpopular. It was great. And that's what he wanted.
Yeah.
Because obviously he's making money.
Right.
And also, he was the first one to really actually own the rights to his name.
Yes.
Which was really big for the boys. A lot of them really didn't care, but really, when you're on a stage like this, you gotta own your name and own your brand. Because now he's still making money off of this.
Yeah, he's still making money off Honky Tonk Man. And
absolutely.
the Elvis gimmick. I mean, that is just a gimmick that it's kind of like Hulk Hogan. Even Hulk Hogan didn't have the same gimmick throughout his entire career.
Right. Well, it got stale. Then he became Hollywood. And
So it really is a testament to how some characters can just be one person forever, like The Undertaker, and be malleable enough as a character to make it work, whether you're
Honky Tonk Man or a heel. Honky Tonk Man really didn't have to do much with it. No. Because he knew how to draw heat.
Because Elvis impersonators, really, that's one of the simplest gimmicks. But
this gimmick shouldn't have worked at all. It shouldn't have worked at all, but it did.
Right. But it worked because it was the right person. with the right manager.
I mean, he's a Hall of Famer for God's sake.
At the right time, and was given the right chance to become a star. I mean, obviously, like I said, they had to make him heel because he was not getting the...
I couldn't imagine him being babyface.
Right.
Now, people respect him now because of Honky Tonk Man, but at that time, I couldn't even see him as a babyface at all.
All right. Well, let's go on to my final character here. We're going to talk about Bray Wyatt. And we're talking about the Fiend, the Firefly Funhouse version of Bray Wyatt.
Right.
So, what made this gimmick work was because Bray Wyatt came up with the gimmick. Mm-hmm. What caused this gimmick to fail was because of the person who was behind that character, Bray Wyatt.
Right.
Wyndham Rotunda was... I hate to say this, but the wrestling was not the reason that he got over.
No.
He was not... I'm not saying he was a bad wrestler, but he certainly wasn't an Undertaker character.
Right.
That's why.
Here's the thing that I love about this character and why I think this worked. Number one, you're right. He did create it, and I think nobody else could have pulled this off.
No.
There was one thing about this. Number one, it is the universe, but also there's the contrast.
Right.
Where you know that the Fiend is Bray Wyatt. You know it.
Right.
But it's so separated out that you immerse yourself into it. It takes you away from the world.
And it kind of reminds me of the Broken gimmick wherein he goes to a lot of his past iterations.
There's a lot of hints with that. A lot of the little puppets are... Because really what this was, what the Firefly Funhouse, the Mr. Rogers thing was, it was basically like an inner monologue of himself. So you had the thing for Sister Abigail, and you had you
had Porky Pig
the Porky Pig for his
Husky Harris character. You have the Buzzard for his swamp
for his cult leader gimmick.
For a swamp cult leader gimmick. You had cameos of Mr. McMahon occasionally.
Right. And once again, it gave a lot of depth and a lot of different things. And then there were subtle things, too. You had to pay attention to a Bray Wyatt promo to get the full experience of a Bray Wyatt promo. The scene transitions were a pentagram because, once again, it's about the hinting of what is Bray Wyatt?
Right.
Is he this or is he the Fiend?
Right.
You just don't know.
Ultimately, what destroyed him was the fact that he was very protective of his character. Now, that is good because I think it exposes a very deep-rooted issue within WWE that continues to this day is in how WWE treats their characters.
Right.
What is WWE doing with their characters?
Right.
You have someone like, we're going to talk about it, but someone like Nikki Ash today who comes up with the gimmick that is already being ruined by WWE.
Right.
You have this character is still being ruined by the WWE.
Because Alexa Bliss is still the demon that they incorporated. But then she turns on him, and then there was no update.
Right.
Now, obviously, it was nobody's fault. Obviously, Bray Wyatt is going through a lot because he was so close with Brody Lee. And it really messed with his mind. And we don't fault him for that, but once again, they never had a follow-up to what was going on.
Right.
It just dropped it. And now Alexa Bliss... is this demon character with Lily for no discernible reason because the original person isn't there.
Right.
Either you have everybody in the universe incorporated or you don't do the gimmick at all.
Right.
And that's just how it is.
Right.
And they're trying with it. I think Alexa Bliss is trying her best, but once again, her heart's not in it.
Right.
Because
Bray
Wyatt's not there. Right, exactly.
Bray's gone. Her heart's just not into it anymore.
And we're going to start seeing this more and more and more. And just because of his release, backstage is not good.
Right.
It's not. The morale is down because Bray Wyatt was very likable. And he really kept that glue together. And you lost that.
Right.
And the gimmick really shows, number one, his creativity.
Yeah.
And anybody is going to be so lucky to have him. I think this break, the 90-day non-compete, is actually going to be really good for him.
Yeah. But
because he needs some time away.
At the same time, let's go back to the gimmick because we're kind of getting into more of the new stuff. But the gimmick should not have worked. It did work.
Right.
Despite WWE. It didn't work because of WWE.
In spite of it.
It
right.
worked in spite of it.
It worked because of Bray, but it was also torn down in one way or another because of Bray.
Right.
Because he allowed this to happen.
Because because WWE capitalized on it too quickly.
Right.
They
put him the Universal Champion,
Right.
which, number one, he shouldn't have won at all. Honestly, like zero.
Right.
He shouldn't have won this title. Because then, at some point in time, The Fiend would have to lose. And at that time, The Fiend was white hot. Why would you make him lose?
Right.
So, and then you make him lose on, I'm sorry, an arguably a very large event against Goldberg of all people.
Right.
And it's like, oh, great. And I think that was after the Undertaker match.
Yeah.
So you had a guy who's clearly not there against the most over person on the roster and
Right.
wrestling at that time, and then you beat him.
And then you have, and then of course we get into 2020, and that's a whole bag of worms. But
Right.
Again, they try too many different things that just didn't work, and it kind of ruined the character. And then Bray Wyatt got mad and got very protective of the character.
Right.
And you kind of WWE put themselves in that corner, but then Bray kind of reinforced that by saying, "Yeah, you put me into a bad spot. Now
Right.
my character is ruined because of you."
Right. And then he had to go because then he had the mental issues with Brody. And then he was released. It's like, okay, well, then what's going to happen now? And that's now WWE's court. Because, number one, Bray Wyatt owns the character, so he can do whatever he wants with it.
He doesn't own Bray Wyatt, but he owns The Fiend.
Right, he owns The Fiend. He can use that.
Yeah.
So he's going to, and I hope he does. I hope he goes to either AEW or Impact or something and do that.
Right.
Or even New Japan.
Go somewhere where he can thrive with his character, where he can
Right.
be creative with his character.
Once again, it's like Matt Hardy. There's a lot of creativity, a lot of depth, and that's why I think they worked really well together.
Yeah.
So, that's what it is. So, when we come back, we will be talking about my gimmicks within the same kind of lore of open discussion, blah, blah, blah. So, join us here in a minute when we come back. So, we are back. Now, we did mention her a couple of times for my bad gimmicks that worked. And I know you said you did not like the Nikki Ash character, but here's the thing. No. I think it is working. She is the most popular thing on Raw right now. Because number one, you can tell that she is 100% invested in it. WWE Creative wanted to do a character change with Nikki Cross. Right. Because Nikki Cross had the momentum. She beat Charlotte and she beat Rhea Ripley before the character change. So she was already hot with having the momentum. She changes to this, and you can tell it's a fresh, new change of clothes in one context or another. She's rejuvenated. She's having fun with it. But then also WWE is 100% invested in it. She won Money in the Bank. For the first pay-per-view in front of an audience since the pandemic, she won. And then the crowd reaction was crazy. Then she cashes in Money in the Bank against Charlotte Flair because everybody does not like Charlotte Flair. I do. I like Charlotte. But that's beside the point. She cashes it in on a major heel. Boom. Pins her. Roof comes off of the place. Then she's having good matches with Charlotte, no holds barred last week. On television where Nikki beat her clean in the middle of the ring. Which, once again, the thing is, with Nikki Ash, I think, one, the character is working because there are a lot of the characters, a lot of the demographic that WWE is really wanting to target.
Right.
They're really wanting a woman inspiration.
Right.
And honestly, I think Nikki Ash is really epitomizing that kind of inspiration. Right. Nikki, nobody else could have done this gimmick other than her, other than Glenn Cross.
Right.
Nobody else, because she's just having way too much fun with it, and and we're seeing the results of it. People really like her. She has the highest rated segments across the board when she is involved in a match. I think WWE is going to try to cut her legs out, but this is a character that's still happening right now.
Right.
So it's hard to really get into a 5-minute dissertation regarding Nikki Ash. But if they continue with what they're doing with her now, we will go down the line when Nikki Ash either retires or changes her gimmick again, and really we're going to say that it was successful. Right now it is.
Right.
WWE will do something to BS it. But
I mean, that's the problem that I have is that WWE is going to ruin this gimmick in like 6 months.
Well, I mean, as long as it's successful now, that's why I put it on there. This shouldn't have been as successful from day one, but it is.
Right.
And it is. So, this one is interesting. I'm talking about Doink the Clown. This was brought to McMahon by Matt Osborne, or Matt Bourne, who played the original Doink.
Right.
His idea was to have your stereotypical clown just like this, but be a heel. That was the original gimmick. And they did it great because, I mean, look at that. And he had the laugh. He would stare directly into the camera really menacingly. The theme song was great, and people were scared. Also, he would play cruel jokes on the audience, and he would do that to the wrestlers to win his matches. And he was hated. He never really won titles. He actually never won a title. But the gimmick itself, number one, they introduced this gimmick a year after the original It came out. So right when you had Pennywise the Dancing Clown, the original Dancing Clown, bright colored but evil, people already had in their minds, they already had like clowns are bad, clowns are evil, heel clown.
Right.
So this couldn't have come at a better time. But also, then they turned him babyface, I think, at the right time as well. Attacking Jerry the King Lawler, who was the biggest heel in WWF at that time as well. That's why he worked with fucking Bret Hart, for God's sake. But then he started to become a fan favorite. Then he had all of the little gimmicks. And once again, you had that comedy relief right when WWE, at this point, was starting to turn to more of the serious characters.
Right.
Now, they still had some, goofy stuff, but they made Doink the Clown be involved with people who weren't entirely goofy. Right. Like your Jerry the King Lawler is an established character wrestler already.
Right.
And then all of that great stuff. And obviously it worked. People still remember fondly of Doink the Clown. And this is wrestling, for God's sake.
Doink would still continue to make appearances, been very sporadic since the initial run. But
and other people played Doink as well. 30 years after. Now, there was a gimmick right before Matt Bourne died, and it was that Doink the Clown was going through a rebranding in 2010. It was actually called Reborn Yourself, and it was Doink the Clown, but it had the Heath Ledger Joker appearance. So I'm like, wow, that would have been great on television. Yeah. And it would just give that so much more depth. But I really, really wanted to talk about Doink just because of the origins of it. And if it was done by anybody else, once again, a person who is so invested in the character that even 30, 40 years later, they're still going to use this gimmick. And it's a fun gimmick. It really is. All for the little kiddies. And WWE always likes it. But I just like the heel Doink. It was just great. And I saw why it always got over. Now, one that we personally experienced was Eugene. Eugene was a character that was derived from Nick Dismore, and then he also gives credit to Brian Gurewitz, and then also Rip Rogers, who actually came up with the original idea of Eugene because Rip Rogers' son had autism and loved wrestling and would mimic the moves. So from that, they presented it to McMahon. McMahon thought it was a good idea. And Dismore...
This was a very much... this was not the PG era. This was very much...
This was Ruthless Aggression era.
This was Ruthless Aggression.
Now, the thing is that this gimmick was not popular at first. There were autism advocacy groups that really attacked WWE for the gimmick. But they persisted because their idea was that it was actually like a savant character where Eugene had the mental disability.
Right.
But he knew what this stuff was supposed to look like and wrestled perfectly.
Right.
And the contrast of those, along with the mannerisms, because actually Dinsmore would interact with other individuals with autism or anything like that to get the mannerisms down.
Right.
And they got over. And I remember how unbelievably over Eugene was.
Yep. And in fact, that led to his success as well, being tag team champion multiple occasions. Or was it just once?
I think it was only once with William Regal.
Right.
Who, once again, you had William Regal that, because it was Eric Bischoff's nephew. It was nephew. And William Regal was supposed to watch him. And then eventually, Eugene, they formed that friendship.
Bond. Right.
And then you had Eugene getting incorporated with 2004 Triple H and Evolution.
Right.
Where he really liked them, and he was like, oh my God, you're my favorite wrestler. And that was actually Eugene's favorite wrestler was Triple H.
Right.
So Eugene was in high-profile programs.
Right.
With Eric Bischoff, William Regal, Chris Jericho, The Rock, Triple H. I mean, Evolution. It was the biggest stuff. Chris Benoit as world champion.
Right.
And Eugene was involved in it, and that's why it really got so popular. And I remember how popular fucking Eugene was.
Yeah.
I think his theme song at that time, actually was the most downloaded on iTunes, like, way back in the day.
Nice.
It was crazy on how popular this guy should be. And once again, shouldn't have been this popular.
Right.
Of just the lightning rod that it was.
Yep.
But they had this vision. And I think, once again, you never judge the book by its initial cover, where you need to watch the character go. Now, obviously, if it's something that's meant to be offensive, it's meant to be offensive. I never saw Eugene as offensive at all. Maybe now, if they really wanted to do something with this...
could not happen today.
No.
No.
Absolutely not. The only way that they could do something possibly like this, if they actually had a person with high-functioning autism perform.
Yes.
That's the only way you can do it.
The only way you're going to have that happen.
Absolutely. And it was autism. They confirmed it. Dinsmore confirmed it, and he worked directly with the advocacy groups to make sure that it was done tastefully, which, once again, give them credit.
Right.
To making sure that this was not outwardly offensive.
Right.
And Dinsmore had a...
That would not have happened in the Attitude Era. In the Attitude Era, they would not have given a fuck, but I think that they started to give a fuck a little bit more.
Right. And then also Dinsmore wanted to make sure that it was done well because of where the idea came from.
Right.
Especially because Rip Rogers wanted to make sure that this was done well because there was family involved.
Right.
Or at least it was that there. And good on Dinsmore to making sure that the character was done well. And he did a great job at it.
And that he's still very well known because of his character to this day.
Right. And then he actually did very briefly Eugene as the superhero, which I'm surprised they never capitalized on because that would have been a really good gimmick, especially with the performance of the autism thing with Eugene along with the superhero would have been believable. And then the one thing that I really did not like them, they were trying to make Eugene heel at one time.
Right.
Because I remember when Eugene was saying, I am special, and started to attack all the baby faces. And I'm like, let's not do that. Because once again, now you're starting to get into a person with a mental disability saying something like that.
Right.
It kind of comes off a little...
It kind of comes off, a little...
Right.
I understand they want to add dimension, but sometimes the simpler the better.
Right. And this is a character where the simpler the better. Exactly. And honestly, I really don't have much else to say other with that Eugene. And okay, this one I love to talk about. Let's talk about Goldust.
Ooh.
So,
gender fluid something or another, which
now,
would never work in this day and age.
Honestly, I think it could have. Because Goldust, because Dustin Rhodes, given credit to him, he evolved the character enough.
Yeah, he did.
The original Goldust, probably not.
Right.
But here's the thing, androgynous characters can work still.
Right.
But the thing
we all know that Goldust is Dustin Rhodes is not that kind of person.
Right. Now, the origins of this was a McMahon idea. He wanted to create a character that would push the limit of certain censors and really kind of get away from it. Because right now, Goldust was that transition period between Attitude Era and the New Generation Era.
Right.
Where Goldust did androgynous things. And Dustin wanted to take on the role because he needed to rejuvenate his career. Dustin has been competing since like the early 80s. Keep that in mind, people. So Dustin Rhodes is already a veteran at this point. And so this gave him that opportunity, and he put 100% into the development of the character. He was the one who wanted to do a lot of the androgynous stuff in his feud, and this pushed boundaries. This really did. Because at the time, this did not look well, and he was mega heat. And also, he had Marlena, where they're like, oh, you have this androgynous character, but then you have Marlena, who was like the director part of it. Really the breakout of this character of Goldust that we know of was his rivalry with Razor Ramon, who was white hot for the Intercontinental Champion. Where Goldust insinuated that he fell in love with Razor. And Razor was uncomfortable. Scott Hall has said that he was uncomfortable with the gimmick at first, but he saw how much it was drawing, and he decided to go along with it. Where they drew the line were two things. Dustin Rhodes wanted to get actual breast implants for the character.
Oh, God.
Like, he actually wanted breast augmentation surgery. He was that involved into the character.
Okay.
But also, he wanted to actually get a tattoo of Razor Ramon, of Scott Hall's face, on him to show his love. And he didn't want a prosthetic tattoo. He legitimately wanted to get a real tattoo.
Okay.
Obviously, Razor was uncomfortable, and McMahon shot down the idea because that would have gone too far. But really, this character worked for many of reasons. And I think, number one, the investment of the character, right time, right place. They pushed him really hard, too. And then also, the longevity of the career of Dustin with this character. Now, there were, hiccups and all of that. They tried to do this with Black Rain and TNA. But Dustin was definitely in a much different headspace at that time. And he's gone through it, and we won't reiterate it because it's really dark. Lucky he's out of that. But also how he changed it. Where you saw Goldust in the heart of the Attitude Era. And then you had the artist formerly known as Goldust, where he would do different stuff. Didn't last long, but it was there. And then you had him with the current generation, where he was just Goldust. Where he would do the mannerisms, not as extreme. But he would do the... And then he would... and then his stuff with, like, Booker T, and his stuff with NXT's, like... OG days and the stuff with Cody Rhodes when they were in WWE, it really kept him around. And I think with number one, his team with Booker T was awesome. Won tag team champions with that. He had the stuff with the Hurricane, which was always awesome. And he really kept it fresh with that. It was like, oh, it's Goldust. And nothing really changed other than the stuttering, which actually did help him. Because then he was in a rivalry with Evolution. And then now you see a modified version of Goldust that Dustin is still doing now. He's still doing it now. With the half face painted, with the red or the blue stuff. It's literally the same character, except now he's just called the Natural again. And it really shows of how iconic this character really became. And if you told anybody in the mid-90s of like the longevity of this character, they would have told you that you're fucking crazy. But once again, I think the right person was there. And also, Dustin was physically imposing and a very good wrestler at that time. So that really helped him. I mean, Dustin Rhodes is 6'6". He's really tall. And I think I'm actually the second to last one. I really wanted to talk about this guy. I want to talk about Damien Mizdow.
Oh, Jesus.
Now, at this time, Damien Sandow was going through different gimmicks. So he would do like a basketball player or a different whatever. And he got to mimicking The Miz. Originally, it was only for 1 week. But it became really, really popular because The Miz was Intercontinental Champion and Tag Team Champion. The Miz was on the radar. And Damien Sandow, to his absolute credit, nailed this. He would mimic everything. When The Miz was in the ring, he would mimic everything from clotheslines to taking bumps. He would bump around, and he wasn't even in the ring. He was at ringside, and people would say, Damien Mizdow. And he would come out, do the posing with the Miz. They would boo the Miz, but then Damien Sandow would get the biggest pop of the night. And then the one thing is that he not only just mimicked him on screen in the ring, he would mimic him backstage by talking but not saying anything.
Right.
With the same mannerisms. He went over the top with it. And that's why it was successful, because it was so funny. And you could tell that he was having a lot of fun with it. The Miz was having a ball with it. And I think that's why it worked. But then they won the tag team champions together because it was so popular. And then the Miz was holding both real tag team belts. And Damien Mizdow was carrying around toy replica versions of the titles.
Right.
When he won the Intercontinental Champion, when the Miz won the Intercontinental Champion, Mizdow won he carried around a toy version of it. And once again, slight details make the character. What are your fond memories of Damien Mizdow? Did you like the character?
I wasn't watching wrestling at this time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You didn't watch any of the segments or anything?
Nope.
No? So, you clearly reacted to it. And then he eliminated the Miz, and there was a huge pop at WrestleMania. We did watch that. There was a big pop during the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal.
Oh,
when they were in Florida.
What year was that?
I think this was in 2013, 2014. It was when Sting faced Triple H that year.
Oh, no, that wasn't in Florida. That was in California.
That was in California. Right.
Oh, you're right. That was, okay.
Yeah. So that's why Damien Mizdow really worked, because of just that incorporation. And finally, I want to end off at least with a gimmick that a lot of people aren't going to want me to talk about, but I have to. It's the Three Faces of Foley.
Okay. So we got Mick Foley. We got Mick Foley's alter ego. So we got Cactus Jack, which is what he did in WCW. Oh, not in WCW. In ECW.
Dude Love, which was his gimmick that he created in high school, I believe.
Yes.
And then Mankind is when he debuted.
Yes.
Now, why this worked? Now, number one, he debuted in 1995, 1993, 1994. So really, right.
So are we really going to talk? Are we going to talk about the interaction between these four faces, or what?
Well, I'm gonna do brief things about it, but I really want to talk about Mankind the most, just because that one is more incorporated with WWF. So the one thing that really made this character work, not only because of the mannerisms, and at that time, once again, you have a much more serious character clashing with silly characters, but then they did that interview with Jim Ross and Mankind that gave the character depth of this. And they use his real name, too. It's this is the alter ego of Mick Foley. Mm-hmm. And it was oh my gosh, from my childhood. And they showed footage of him jumping off as Dude Love, which was it wasn't supposed to be the incorporation. This was never supposed to happen. But then you saw this character depth that was never seen before in wrestling ever at this time, because he would talk about his family life, his growing up, and he would incorporate a lot of these different aspects of himself that became Mankind, and it got over, and people were terrified of him.
Right.
And he would squeal, and everything that he did really played a part. And then obviously he became really popular and enjoying the hardcore matches. And people were like, oh my God, look at him against Terry Funk and all of this stuff in ECW. And in ECW, with Cactus Jack, biggest heel in the company, because he would not be hardcore. He would do headlocks and stuff in ECW. You don't do headlocks in ECW. You hit somebody over the head with a chair. And that's why he became really popular there. And then obviously that was brought into the WWF because of how popular that was.
Right.
And then Dude Love came around because at this point it was just kind of fun. And they really want to do something different because these two were getting stale. So they brought in Dude Love to really incorporate that, because McMahon saw the tapes and he really liked the gimmick.
Yeah.
And then won tag team champions. Obviously, the WWF champion with that infamous spot of, that'll put butts in seat, Tony Schiavone. And then, a ton of people switched over and watched it because it was deserved and people really wanted to see that.
Right.
And here's one thing. These gimmicks, all three of them, would have worked with nobody else.
Well, of course not.
Right. And once again, the mannerisms never changed.
Right.
The actual moves never changed,
Right.
at all. And that's the one thing. It really gave the creativity, the mindset of Mick Foley
Right.
was right here making 3 gimmicks work to the point where Mick Foley came out to the Royal Rumble with all 3 gimmicks.
Mm-hmm.
I think he came in as Mankind, and then Dude Love, and then Cactus Jack, all in the same match.
Yep.
So, and then people remember these guys not only separately, very fondly, but together as a collective.
Right.
And it is a bad gimmick. I'm sorry. All of these are silly, bad gimmicks.
They would not work today.
No, not at all. And they wouldn't have worked in any other era unless it was the 90s at all. Mick Foley couldn't have done Dude Love or Mankind in ECW because you could not have been benefited from the production and the character depth presented to make these 2 work. And with Cactus Jack, he had to wait for the Attitude Era to be in full spring to make that work because Cactus Jack was the hardcore side of it.
Right.
And then, obviously, with Mankind, he couldn't have done Mankind really anywhere, anytime else, and these gimmicks couldn't have worked today.
Right.
So I'm going to leave it off with that. So let me know what gimmicks maybe that we missed. What gimmicks did you really like? What were your experiences of these gimmicks at the time of their doing?
Right.
Obviously, we grew up in our really big time with wrestling was the Ruthless Aggression era, really. So your Eugenes and stuff or the stuff that we were really experienced to, and that was kind of there. Peanut Gallery, do you have any other gimmicks or anything like that? No?
Nope.
Okay, great. So, next week, we're going to be doing Wrestling Lesson, and we're going to be doing Heckling again because we have a pay-per-view, finally.
Yay.
And it's going to be Triple Mania.
Oh.
And it's the only pay-per-view, but it's Triple Mania.
Oh, hell yeah.
But then the week after,
We are going to have a doozy.
Oh, that's going to be fun. So, if you did enjoy it, remember to subscribe, follow wherever you're listening or watching this on, share with your friends, become a patron, and all that great stuff. Follow us on all of our social medias. The link will be down below in the description, wherever it is. And as always, be
Majestic.